Welcome back to Season 2 of That's So Second Millennium, the podcast where we explore how science and religion can coexist, because they can, and what they can produce together if we let them, because your third millennium will be a whole lot brighter if you do. Your hosts are Bill Schmidt and me, Paul Giesting. Welcome back to episode 60 of That's So Second Millennium. We're going to continue our interview with Steve Barr and focus on the upcoming 2019 Society of Catholic Scientists Conference. Again, just like last week, we had to record this on freeconferencecall.com, so it sounds like a telephone conversation. Because it is, in fact, a telephone conversation, we will be seeing if we can get Zencastr to do better than it has been. No promises, but we will, of course, do what we can to get the audio quality up as soon as we can, definitely before we start interviewing speakers for the conference itself.
Okay, so I think we can transition to sort of full-on focus on the actual content of the upcoming conference. So we're again, the topic is going to be what it means to be human. So that harks back to you mentioned the talk about language at the first conference.
Right, and I almost wish we had even considered having Bob Berwick come back to talk about that. But so we have, I think, a very interesting lineup of speakers.
It does seem to be quite a variety. Yeah,
it is, and we have as opposed to our earlier conferences, we have a higher percentage of non-scientists speaking. So shall I go through some of the speakers we have lined up?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we could do it in chronological order or whatever order.
Well, it's sort of the order of the talks. I'm not going to go through all. There's going to be a dozen talks, but I'll sort of hit the highlights, or not the highlights, but the main talks, and mention some of the others. Our kickoff lecture, our keynote lecture, is by a very well-known Catholic philosopher, Marie George of St. John's University. People had suggested that we have the first talk at the conference give some sort of philosophical, theological context to the whole conference. And
so we had Phaser talk last year, and that led off the conference. Phaser talk,
but gave it. He was our kickoff speaker, keynote speaker, and he gave a very good philosophical talk. But probably, since there was a lot of physics in the conference and so on, probably we could have had a more of an introduction to the whole topic of the conference at the beginning. So this time we learned from that, and so Marie George is going to speak about what does "made in the image of God" mean. So many Catholics, if you ask, what is it that makes us spiritual beings? What does that mean to say that we have a spiritual soul, unlike other creatures on earth? What does it mean to say we're made in the image of God? So there's even many Catholics are a little shaky on that, and so she's going to present the sort of the Catholic theological tradition about what makes us distinctive and what makes us in the image of God. And I know what she's going to say. I've talked a lot with her about it, and it's going to be a very, very interesting talk. So she's, as I said, a philosopher, a well-known Catholic philosopher. Our next talk is one of our invited speakers who's not Catholic, is a fellow named Stephen Mithen. He's from the University of Reading in the United Kingdom. And he is an expert on prehistoric, human origins, prehistoric man. And so his talk is called Becoming and Being Human, Evidence from the Archaeological, Fossil, and Genetic Record. So it's going to be about Neanderthals and Homo sapiens and all of that kind of thing. A big question no one knows the answer to is, did Neanderthals, did they have language? Were they fully human, or were they extremely intelligent apes? And he has actually written books on Neanderthals and is a world expert on this kind of thing. So it should be a fascinating talk. All of us. It's turned out that all of us, at least most people anyway, have some Neanderthal DNA in us. So there was some interactions between modern humans and Neanderthals way back when. So it's a very interesting question of, to put it in theological terms, were Adam and Eve were the first truly human beings with spiritual souls? Were they after the branching, our common ancestor with Neanderthals, or were they before that or after that?
Mm-hmm. Where would that fall?
And then another lecture right after, we try to group the lectures by theme, is a professor who does a lot of work in genetics and biomedical research, who's named Benjamin Rybicki, and he's going to actually talk about the science behind human ancestry mapping, which of course is a very popular topic nowadays. People tracing their ancestry.
Interesting.
But of course, it not only tells us about, and so that, and the subtitle of his talk is "What can it tell us about our human nature?" So it not only tells us, whether you should be wearing lederhosen or kilts like in the commercial. It also tells you. It tells you something about human origins. It's a tool for understanding how we're related to Neanderthals or to, various other early proto-human or human species. So then we switch, and we're having a talk on genetic engineering, because a big fear is, what about transhumanism? What about is it possible to engineer beings, that are sort of transhuman? Can we change human nature? Can we by genetic engineering turn human beings into things that are somehow not human? Or what about so that's a very worrisome aspect of biotechnology. So one powerful technique is called CRISPR, and so Nicanor Austriaco, who's on our board and does work and is a research biologist and an expert on this kind of thing, is going to talk about CRISPR and genetic engineering, the science and its implications. And there'll be other talks in the conference as well on that theme by other. For example, there'll be talks on tissue engineering. There's a professor, Christopher Raub from Catholic University, who will talk about. His talk is called "Will Tissue Engineering Change Human Nature?" So that there's that whole side of the issue. We're having a talk. One of our other invited non-Catholic speakers is Connor Cunningham, and he's a very well-known theologian. He's at the University of Nottingham in the United Kingdom. And he wrote a book that's called Darwin's Pious, Idea. So, so he's written some very well-known books on looking at evolution from a theological perspective. And his talk, he hasn't yet revealed exactly what is in it, but its title is Homo Ex Machina and Imago Dei, the Nightmare Dream. So it's going to be, I think, about what makes us distinctive as opposed to animals or machines. What makes humans radically different from either.
That is a suggested title that gives him a lot of latitude to talk about what he ends up feeling like he has stuff he wants to talk about.
Well, he has a lot to say, and I think he's probably trying to select which thing would be most interesting for this audience in this conference. But so his book was a very acclaimed book on evolution from he's a Christian, but he's not a Catholic. Then we have talks on neuroscience and neurobiology. So one of our speakers, Sansolis de la Calle, is a neuroscientist from Ohio University. She's a head of some research institute out there, and she's talking about the neurobiology of emotions and the evidence of human interconnectedness. So, what at the neurological level, at the level of the brain and our neurological structure, is there what makes us distinctive, and also how did some of our mental faculties, how do they relate to the rest of the living world? There's another talk on a similar subject. There's another speaker on a similar theme. Now there's another. Our St. Albert Award is being given to Maureen Kondik of the University of Utah. She's it works in embryology and things of that sort, and she's we're giving her an award because she was one of the brave voices out there back in the day when it was hotly debated. Embryonic stem cell research was hotly debated, and she was one of the few scientists who had the courage to come out and argue for the full humanity of embryonic human life and for the moral, ethical arguments against destroying it. So she's going to give a talk. Again, this gets to another aspect of what it is to be human. When does an individual human life begin? What defines the human organism? Her talk is entitled "Human Beings Are Defined by Organization." So he's going to be relating the philosophy and theology to the hard science of embryology, and so we're getting not only to how the human species arose, but how an individual human being, what are the boundaries? What are the boundaries of human life at the beginnings of our species? What are the boundaries at the beginning of an individual human life? And what are the boundaries when it comes to changing human beings through genetic engineering and so on? So it's about the limits and the nature of a human being. And we have a very fun
yes, the banquet
as
our
banquet address. Now, since this is a more humanistic subject, we have a literary person speaking. So, in fact, a very well-known and highly awarded science fiction writer named Michael Francis Flynn, and he wrote a book. He's won many awards, like the Robert A. Heinlein Medal and many other awards. Very well-known science fiction author, and he wrote a book called Eiffelheim, which is I have not read it yet, but my wife has. It's about extraterrestrial. It's about aliens who crash land in, I think it's 14th century Germany, or maybe 15th, 14th century Germany. Yeah. And of course, the villagers are all Catholic, and one of the main characters in the story is a priest. And there's a lot of interesting theological and philosophical and scientific many such issues discussed in the book. So it's a very appropriate for this conference. And he's going to be giving this book I mentioned is called Eiffelheim, and his after dinner talk is called Discovering Eiffelheim, and it should be very fun. I actually read an article he wrote with the same title, and it's really fascinating. We're going to have a book signing afterwards where people.
There you go. Yes.
Copies. So anyway, we have a lot of I haven't got through everybody, but we have theologians and philosophers and biologists and all sorts of scientists speaking, and even a sci-fic author. So
yes,
it should be a lot of fun.
Something for everyone. Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Have you? And of course, I have to ask as a attendee, have we nailed down where the conference mass is? Are we going to actually? Well, of course, we're not going to be in the Basilica. They'll have regular mass.
Yeah, the Basilica. Unfortunately, the mass is not at the right time to fit in our schedule. So, it's between one of two dorm chapels, and I'm still not sure which one it is. But which is, this is the kind of thing that drives organizers crazy. Not. Yes. So, but we have a chapel nailed down. We're just not sure which of the two it is.
Right. We're sure we're going to get a chapel. We're just not sure which one. Yeah.
At the conference mass, the one on Sunday, June 9th, the celebrant is going to be Father Joachim Osterman. He's had a very distinguished biomedical research career, and then he became a Franciscan friar. He left. But so he actually submitted an abstract for a talk, and instead of having him give it as a talk at the conference, he's going to give a shorter version 15, 20-minute version, because it was very appropriate for a homily, actually. It was very theological. So he's going to actually give a very interesting homily on relation of science and faith. So we have everything. We have all bases covered here.
Yeah, that's great.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And one thing that strikes me is that these topics are in no way exclusively in the intellectual realm, but have really clearly relevant implications for policy questions that are at the center of civic debate in the world today, right?
That's true, but we, as an organization, now, for example, we have talks about tissue engineering, we have talks about genetic engineering, CRISPR, talks about the beginnings of human life and so on, which clearly have implications, social and so on, political. But one thing that's sort of here's probably an emergency vehicle. But one of the things that we, as an organization, are very committed to is staying out of public policy questions. It's actually in our bylaws that we do not take positions on or issue statements on public policy questions. And so we because I think it's dangerous for Catholic organizations of our sort. I mean, there are some, but for this kind of sort of more intellectual organization, might get sucked into politics, which can be very divisive, and so we don't we want to stay very clear of any of that. But of course, we're giving our award to Maureen Kondik, who now it's interesting when she testified before Congress many times. A number of times anyway, wrote many articles. Her articles, I would say, she stayed away from the politics of the issue, though it was in the midst of a huge political debate. Her talks and her articles and testimony were about 80% science, just the science, and about 20% just sort of ethical, not even from a theological point of view, but just from sort of bioethical considerations. So nothing to do with policy issues or law, what law should be passed, and so on and so forth. So, so even there, we want to stick to the relation between science and faith, rather than say political issues and faith. It's really science faith.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's important for an institution to have focus and to, do what it's doing in order to advance that focus. It's just one of the truths of human organization.
Right, and be very careful. So people a lot of people are hesitant to join organizations because there's a lot of paranoia nowadays. Things are very so I've had people that I've invited. When I was inviting a lot of people to join. And we were new at that point. They want to know what am I getting into? I mean, who are these people? Do they have some ulterior motives or some hidden agenda? And so there's less of that now because they can go to our website and see on our website are the talks from previous conferences, and they can see the nature of what we're doing. And
there's a lot more context now.
Yeah, and so they know that we're real scientists. There's nothing flaky about the science. In fact, every once in a while, someone applies to join who is a bit of a flake. I mean, there are on the fringes of science, as on the fringes of anything else, there are people who are a little flaky, and we try to avoid as politely as we can to say you don't really belong here. Same theologically, we're not pushing any envelopes in the sense of. We're not trying to, skate close to the edge of orthodoxy or anything. So we're solid. We try to be solid theologically, scientifically.
Which I mean, there are certainly people there within the Catholic fold who are just as sort of biblically literal as there are. Now, of course, they're far more numerous on the Protestant side of the divide, but.
Right, and that has been an issue. There have been a couple of people. I mean, as it also says in our bylaws, we do not take positions on scientific issues that are debated among experts. Nor do we. There are different within Catholic Orthodoxy. There's a very wide spectrum of views on many theological issues. On Molinism versus Thomism versus these different theological schools and traditions. We're not grinding any axes there. But if something's really on the edge, as you say, a young Earth creationist, we're probably not going to accept them as a member because there's something wrong.
Probably definitely not going to give them a slot at speaking at the conference.
Oh, exactly. But even so, if you think the world's 10,000 years old, then your science is screwed up. And
the argument that God has laid it out, just so as to fool us and put these radioisotopes in there in just such proportions as to test our faith, or something like that.
Right. It's actually one of the things we're very lucky is not lucky, but we're fortunate as Catholics that we don't have to worry about those issues. I mean, I don't know if I've ever met an actual research scientist, a professional, doing basic research in any branch of science, who is a young Earth creationist, Catholic, that is, who is a young Earth creationist. I mean, it sort of goes without saying. We don't, it's just our member, it's just sort of taken for granted, the evolution, that the universe is,
But the Earth is 4.6 billion years old. The universe is, what is it, 1617?
We don't have to argue about this kind of stuff, or it's not debated. It's just taken for. Now, not all Christians are in that situation.
Right.
Our evangelical friends, and we have many evangelical friends, they're in a little more tricky situation because they're very divided on some of those issues. And and we don't have to. It's just not. It's a non-issue for us. So that's one reason that I think the Catholic Scientist Organization we're well positioned, because there's nothing in our faith. There's no doctrines of the Catholic faith. There's no teachings of the magisterium that conflict with scientific facts and theory. So there really is a harmony. Not just there really is a harmony between the Catholic faith and modern science.
And that's I think that's really an important point to underline, is that that isn't an issue, and I think that's a straw dog that's out there because of the tendency of the new atheists to just try to conflate, or people of that ilk. Oh yeah, well, you're just the same as these young Earth creationists, and you're just the same as pick your favorite terrorist motivated by some sort of religious consideration. You're all the same.
That's right. That's something that struck me some years ago. Also, that one of the problems that many atheists make is that to them they just lump anything religious in one big pot. All religion to them is the same. And so somebody doing a rain dance or sticking pins in a voodoo doll, that's religion, or anything, human sacrifice. I mean, to them, religion, it's all of a piece. Whereas there really is a difference, just like there's bad science and good science. The Catholic faith is not to be lumped in with some of these other phenomena. And so we're not defending religion in general. We are standing for the harmony between the modern science and the Catholic faith.
Right. Yes. Because and whatever doctrine, however much it may be mocked in wider society at this point, it's not as if it hasn't been argued and debated in enormous quantity and at the highest caliber by some of the greatest minds of humanity. That's the situation on the Catholic side of the ledger. Exactly.
And we have a glorious history. The Catholic Church has a glorious history. We talked about that in an earlier podcast. A glorious history in science. It's a shame that the one name that most comes to everybody's lips. In fact, I know this because I have asked audiences in the past, Catholic audiences.
Yeah.
What one name do you think of with the Catholic Church and science? And it's the only name that comes to mind is Galileo. And then you say, well, and I show pictures. One of the standard things I do at the beginning of my public lectures, I show a picture of Georges Lemaitre, the founder of the Big Bang Theory, who's a priest. And I show a picture of him talking to Einstein. And this man in a Roman collar, clearly a priest. I say, how many people know who that man is? And maybe 5% of the people raise their hands, or maybe fewer. And I say, well, he is a Catholic priest, and he founded the Big Bang Theory. But so I won't be satisfied until people know the whole really amazing. One of the things we're going to be putting up on our website, hopefully this summer, is I had a project. Some of us had a little project where we wrote biographies, mini biographies, a couple 100-word biographies of 74 important scientists from the Middle Ages up through the 20th century who were devout Catholics. It's quite a remarkable list. It's 74 of them include Nobel Prize winners, very big name people, founders of whole branches of science and so forth. And so that's going to be on our website. I think it'll be one of our purposes is not just fellowship amongst Catholic scientists, but to be a resource for the general public. And I'm hoping that many high school teachers will go to our website and use that as a resource in their classrooms. So there are many, many things we want to do going forward besides having a conference. And that's one of the things that's coming up soon. Is sort of more to be a resource. We might have a speakers bureau is another thing we're thinking of. So many, many things we want to do going forward.
Yeah, so many things to do, so little time and human power to do it with. But
exactly, the fields are ripening for the harvest, but we need more people to come and
ask the harvest master to send out laborers.
Exactly.
So many, and that by itself in the last 10 minutes here has probably been I could see the seeds for like several more conversations in different directions about all these different things. One of which being the modern sort of academic industrial complex and the tenure treadmill and the whole philosophy of working young scientists so that they can't do things like this, so that they can't focus on anything beyond their narrow specialty.
Well, I can because I'm actually about to retire from my active professoring to devote full time to this, and so so that's one way of doing it.
Yes, but those.
Also, there are some Catholic scientists at Catholic institutions at Catholic colleges who can spend a lot of time on this and have it considered part of their academic workload, and so there are ways to combine the science with the faith.
Those are good things. Service to society. Well, thank you for another fascinating conversation. We're really looking forward to the conference, and thanks for being on to discuss it with us.
And thank you for having me back on again, and I look forward to seeing you at the conference.
The music for our podcast is excerpts from Mars and Venus from Gustav Holst's suite The Planets. The recording is by the U.S. Air Force Heritage of America Band and is available in the public domain at museopen.org. If you enjoyed this episode, or it made you think, please subscribe to That's So Second Millennium via Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Podbean, or your podcast service of choice.